Traditional levelling ramps are inexpensive but have their limitations. Automatic levelling systems level your van very precisely but are also very expensive. Could there be something that's in between the two? Hi, it's Dave T here, and those that follow the channel will know that we now have a camper van, but prior to that we had a caravan for many years, and we used Lock & Level's airbag-based levelling system for our twin axle caravan for about 5 years. And without doubt it was one of the best, more likely the best accessory that we purchased for our caravan. Using it made precisely levelling our twin axle caravan so much simpler than using traditional levellers. Now, when we purchased our first camper van last year, the previous owner had very thoughtfully purchased an automatic hydraulic levelling system. This usually made levelling the van as simple as pressing a button, but it did have a few limitations, such as having a more complicated manual mode for when the van was more than just slightly unlevel. It was also very expensive at about £6,000. Well, you may be already aware that we've since parted company with that camper van and now have a Bailey B62, which, as we purchased it from brand new, does not have an automatic levelling system. So it was back to the standard levelling ramps. Or it was, at least, until I came across a Lock & Level stand at the NEC, because that's why I found out that they now have a campervan and motorhome version of their airbag-based levelling system. Well, I had to try this out, so I purchased one, and in this review I'll cover exactly how it works, how well it works, and the advantages and disadvantages of this system. By the way, I purchased the camper leveller myself, and Lock & Level are not really aware that I'm actually making this video. So yeah, these are all my own findings and opinions. Now, our Lock & Level arrived within about 5 days after we ordered it on a Saturday. Inside the plain cardboard box you get 2 Lock & Level levellers, 2 rubber mats, 2 branded carrying bags, one for each leveller and mat, an instruction manual which has detailed instructions with pictures, and 2 spare metal valve caps. Now, when packed folded in their supplied bags, each leveller is about 31 centimetres by 35 centimetres and about 7 centimetres at the thickest point when compressed. Depending on the amount and shape of storage space that you have, they could be stored flat, which would likely then take less volume. And if you can find a suitable bag, they may also actually be easier to put away. Each leveller with its rubber mat and bag weighs 4.2 kilos, which is almost exactly double the weight of this pair of Malenko Wedge XL levellers, but a similar weight to some of Malenko's other ramps. Lock & Level states that the maximum lift is 14 centimetres, which is 1 centimetre less than the very highest point of those Malenko levellers. If that is, you are brave enough to drive right to the very top of them, which is not necessarily recommended. So on balance, the lift is the same or possibly a touch higher than the Malenkos. It's worth bearing in mind, however, that because the lift is pressure related and the maximum inflation pressure is 30 psi, this means that heavier vans may get slightly less lift. To use the leveller, first park the van where you basically want it. Then retrieve the levellers, mats and a 12-volt car inflator, or a manual pump if you want levelling the van to be part of your exercise regime. Now, on uneven ground, in other words bumpy as opposed to not level, then I'd always recommend getting the van to a position where it is as level as possible to begin with. Then back off about a foot or so before placing the leveller in front of the tyre. There's nothing worse than positioning any levelling device so that the van's level actually gets worse as you drive onto it. Check the ground for any sharp objects, then put the rubber mats down first, with the yellow lines in line with either side of the tyre edges. These provide extra protection against punctures. It's also recommended to check the tyre hasn't got any sharp stones etc. stuck into the tread. Now, when placing the mats, ensure that the inflation valve is on the outside edge of where the tyre will be. You should also ensure that the silver valve cap is tight, since the valve in this stem is effectively always open. With both levellers placed, simply drive onto the levellers until the centre of the wheel is over the centre of the leveller. This is the first advantage over and above ramps, because since for solo drivers it is easy and safe to basically just move the van backwards and forwards, get out, check the position, and then roll further forward or backwards until you're in the correct position. Even if you completely overshoot the leveler, you can just reverse back. Not something that you could do with a normal ramp. Now, once you're in position, you can attach the tire inflator to either of the levelers and inflate until the van is at or over the required height. Note that in our example here, lifting the front wheels when inflating the first leveler, the whole of the front van lifts, but there is also some change to the side-to-side tilt. This points to another potential benefit of the lock and level, but I'll come on to that later. Now, once the first wheel has been raised, you can then inflate the second leveler. A useful tip here is that it is often better to lift higher than required, providing you do not exceed that maximum pressure of 30 psi. This is because you can then easily let some of the air out of either leveler. Air is let out by opening that silver valve cap. The caps have a small hole in them and a rubber washer inside to ensure that they seal the valve when closed. For this reason, you should absolutely not use a standard plastic cap in their place. The ability to then add or remove air allows for millimetre precision levelling. Now, one of the questions I asked Lock and Level about the system when I spoke to them at the NEC was whether it increased the amount of wobble in the van. Now, Andrew was actually very honest about this, saying that yes, they tested for this and it did actually increase wobble. But when they then tested the product with real-world campers, they basically didn't notice the difference. As a previous caravan user, wobble was a sign of the steadies not being wound down enough and was easy enough to fix. A previous campervan had an automatic leveler with hydraulic legs, so had absolutely zero wobble. So how did we find it? Well, in an attempt to be reasonably scientific, I actually tested this using a glass of orange juice and a process of then kind of walking and then even jogging up and down the length of the van. Now, as you can just about make out in the footage here, there is a slight amount of additional wobble. Now, I personally found this most notable when I was sitting or laying down and my wife was then moving around in the van. But to be honest, coming, as I said, from a caravan and then a van with a full levelling system, I'm still getting used to the van moving anyway. So it was perhaps surprising that it didn't really bother me too much. Now, if it does, then I suspect that the small amount of additional wobble added by the lock and level won't actually really matter. The solution will likely be get some small axle stands like these to resolve the issue. Just like standard ramps, the lock and level can be used under any of the van's wheels, either both front wheels, both rear wheels, both wheels on one side, or even diagonally opposed wheels. But there is another feature of this system which, to be honest, I don't think that lock and level actually promote enough, and that is the ability to lift a single wheel independently of the wheel above the other leveler. Let me explain. Now, in a vehicle with suspension, if one wheel is lifted, then the vehicle tilts actually on two axes. For example, assuming the van starts completely level, if the passenger side front wheel is lifted, then the floor will be sloping up towards the front, and it will also be sloping up towards the passenger side, if that makes sense. So in a situation where the van is slightly down to the front and the passenger side, then a single leveler or ramp could be used to level a van. But this would then have limits because the uneven suspension load would limit some of the effect of the leveler, and also the maximum lift of 14 centimeters will be compensating for a tilt in two axes. So the overall effect is then more limited. But here's the thing. If using two levelers on whichever side of the van is lowest, front, rear, left or right, the ability to adjust the pressure and therefore the lift of each leveler means that you can compensate for a pitch which is sloping in two directions. On an uneven pitch which is not so much unlevel but, well, let's call it bumpy, where you can then compensate not just for a pitch's slope but also low spots on the pitch. So now we come to the question that you've no doubt been asking yourself: how much are they? Well, at £425 for the pair currently, they are certainly not cheap. But it's worth bearing in mind that they are both designed and manufactured in the UK, and personally, I really like to support British companies whenever I can. For comparison, more traditional plastic levelling ramps range from about 30 quid up to about 70 or so. A fully automatic levelling system comes in at anywhere from £4,000 to £7,000 upwards. Another important thing to consider in terms of price is that if our previous caravan lock and level is anything to go by, then they do hold their value. And that is because they are more expensive and therefore they warrant selling and warrant buying second hand. We sold our twin axle lock and level for £165, almost exactly 5 years after we purchased it, for £200. So all in all, an insignificant cost over 5 years. They are certainly built to be very robust, so if taken care of, should last years. And if you do manage to puncture an airbag, then Lock and Level do actually offer a repair service. Another advantage of buying from a UK company. So let's look at the pros and cons of the Lock and Level. First advantage has to be precision. Once you have driven your van onto the levelers, then you have total control within millimetre precision of how high or low each of those two wheels is raised. Next, I was going to suggest ease of use as the next advantage, but I suspect that many would say traditional levelers are also easy. So instead, I'm going to say consistency, which in its way makes them easier. With ramps, the pitch surface can affect how you use them. For example, a tarmac surface where the ramps might slip, or wet grass where the van may struggle to get traction to drive up the ramps, especially when reversing onto rear ramps. With the Lock and Level, the process is the same every single time, regardless of conditions. From past experience with caravan ramps, they are quick and easy until they aren't, at which point they become an absolute pain. Uneven ground is the next advantage I'd give to Lock and Level, where it's easy to compensate for a pitch that slopes in two directions or is level but uneven or bumpy. Solo campers will also likely find these easier, as there is less need for a spotter to see you onto the leveler. Now, if you're on a soft pitch for multiple days, then the ability to compensate for any sinking is also an advantage, albeit a small one. Now, the biggest downside is inevitably the cost, though as I say, the resale value should be pretty good. So to some degree, you can consider this an investment. Linked to this, you will need to have an electric pump, but to be honest, I think you should carry one of these regardless, so it's not really an extra cost. By the way, I've been thinking about making a review video of various electric pumps. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. Lift limit is the next disadvantage. Malenko's largest ramp has an 18 centimetre lift, a full 4 centimetres, so almost 2 inches taller than the Lock and Level. But it's also 25 centimetres wide, 22 centimetres tall, and a whopping 84 centimetres long, so not an option for vans with limited storage space. The additional wobble may be an issue for some, but I'm usually sensitive to things like that, and it didn't really make much difference to me. Also, the space saved from having larger ramps could be then used to store some lightweight axle stands like these, which you can actually then put in place whilst waiting for the pump to inflate the levelers. Combined, you would then have accurate levelling and a steady van. The other consideration is noise, since to raise the levelers you will need to run a tyre pump. I doubt this is a serious issue, especially on a main campsite where many others will be erecting things like air awnings. So in conclusion, is Lock and Level's new campervan and motorhome leveler worth it? Well, first of all, I know there are plenty of people that aren't really bothered if the van is level or not. And if that's you, then this product obviously isn't a product that would be of interest. But if you prefer your van to be perfectly level so that showers drain correctly and you can sleep comfortably, or you park on bumpy or uneven pitches where you need to level in two directions, or maybe have limited storage space for bulky ramps, or are a solo camper or a driver that's not confident with ramps, then Lock and Level's camper version could well be for you. Either way, I hope you found this video helpful or at least interesting, and if you have, then please hit the like button to help the channel. And if you'd like to see other videos that I make, then please do consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos. But most of all, thanks for watching.